Benjamin Netanyahu was in Washington. The American people in a state dining room full of media were presented with what was called a deal. No questions were taken. Now, a week later, we're having talks when people thought that the talks had resulted in a deal. Where are we actually in this process?
Well, as always with this administration, things are kind of a little bit disorganized and not necessarily in keeping with conventional ways of doing business. Mm-hmm. But I think that the important thing to remember is that all these leaders were in New York during the annual opening of the UN General Assembly. So yes. I imagine that behind the scenes there were a great deal of conversations that occurred between Arab leaders, Israel, European leaders, and Donald Trump and his team. So I wouldn't say that this was just, born yesterday. I think the plan has been in evolution. It's actually serious. It addresses the real issues that no one has been addressing about what the day after a ceasefire is going to look like. But it doesn't appear that Hamas was fully involved in this. And of course, they do have the gun to the head of the Israeli hostages. So we've got to get over yet again this obstacle of how do you get a ceasefire and prisoner exchange and deal with that problem.
Yes, right. The president says he wants them to act fast, knowing the Nobel Peace Prize will be announced on Friday. Maybe I shouldn't conflate those two, but is it possible for this to be taken care of this week if we're that far down the road?
It could be. It's not as if this hasn't been discussed forever and a day. I mean,
of course.
This over and over and over again. There's a split between Hamas. They have a more, perhaps realistic, I won't say moderate, but realistic wing, the political wing in Qatar. I think the Turkish President Erdogan has been working on them and trying to convince them to go in. But the military side of the equation, Izzadin is in Gaza and calling the shots. And of course, their only leverage left are these hostages. So they want concrete guarantees about the day after, which the Israeli government is unlikely to provide. So the pressure that the president's applying is the right way to go about this. Pressure of time, pressure of military responses if the Hamas team doesn't react, and pressure is also coming probably from the Palestinian people themselves, who must be more than fed up with this.
You called this a serious plan. Is Hamas a serious player at the negotiating table?
Well, I think if this works, part of why it's going to be difficult to get Hamas to agree to release the hostages is that the plan deals them out.
Yeah.
Right? Politically, they will not have a say-so. And so that is a recognition of reality on the part of where the Israeli public is, even many Arabs, certainly the United States. But Hamas is going to have a hard time swallowing that. So I think that the fact of the matter is that their leaders, if they want to survive, have come to the point where it's time to move out of Gaza.
The accept the plan or all hell breaks loose mantra from the president would mean what if this didn't work out? I mean, you're literally bombing rubble at this point. Did they flood the tunnels? What else could be done by the IDF?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure they have their options. I mean, they were planning to move into Gaza City and occupy it, which would involve a frankly, rather risky, building to building, block to block warfare, which I don't think any soldier would relish. So it's a real threat, but it's definitely plan B. I think plan A is that all of these various pressure points put on Hamas may make them finally do this deal. Now, they could get a lot out of it. I mean, if the equation is that, of course, a number of Palestinian prisoners would be released, including very prominent personalities, and the remains of the two Sinwar brothers who were assassinated by Israel.
We've got a bit of a headline crossing the terminal, a couple of them from President Trump, not related to what we're talking about. It's about tariffs. Beginning the 1st of November, all medium and heavy-duty trucks coming into the United States from other nations, he writes, will be tariffed at a rate of 25%. We'd heard about the tariff on heavy trucks. Having the November 1st date is news here. It just went red on the terminal, and it's a story that, of course, we'll be tracking throughout the day here. That meeting a week ago with Benjamin Netanyahu was obviously interesting timing. Did the president have to twist his arm to the extent that reports would suggest to get there?
Well, I don't know, but my guess is he did.
Yeah.
I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is very reluctant to remove the tool of military pressure on Hamas, and he has a right-wing element in his coalition that not only wants to exterminate Hamas militarily, but wants to permanently occupy and return settlements to Gaza.
Yeah.
And so he has to balance these political equations. But we also see there's 70% support for this deal among the Israeli public. So I think for Netanyahu, it's maybe not as hard as as people are projecting. But President Trump was clearly determined to do this. He's serious about it, and a forceful president like that can accomplish a great deal.
When you're dealing with the matter of hostages, kind of complicates a potential ceasefire here, and I'm wondering how, as a diplomat, how that plays into negotiations. Are there separate teams that work on that, and how formal should be the handing over of the hostages and the bodies of those who died?
Well, I found my stomach turning when I watched those initial images, the first hostage exchanges, where Hamas was allowed to basically exercise theater with these people who had been held in basements and so forth, and had their colleagues killed. So hopefully it won't be formal. Hopefully it will be up to the normal international standards. There are lots of ways to do that. ICRC, the International Red Cross, can help with that. Red Crescent Society that honors and protects the dignity of the hostages. But President Trump, again, I worked in his first term. He puts hostage issues at the top of the agenda, Americans or other nationals, in ways that very few presidents in my experience have. And that's part, I think, of why he is so motivated to try to bring this tragedy to an end.
It's really interesting you bring that up. Whether he's talking about the hostages here, he always stops down and says, the families, even with those who lost their loved ones, they still want the body back. He always comes back around to talk about how remarkable that is, to make that point. When you hear him talk about the war in Ukraine and the number of young men and women who are dying each week, he talks about the only thing that can stop a bullet is the human body, the terrible death, the tremendous death, as he puts it. Is this a man consumed with his own mortality or that of others?
I'll leave it to others.
I just asked you the wrong question. I find that to be a very compelling point of his personality and character that very few people probably are exposed to, but you worked for him.
Well, you may be onto something. I was just struck as a diplomat that often hostage issues are not always put at the top of the agenda.
How come?
It's just different presidents have different priorities. But this president clearly has prioritized it, perhaps for the reason you said. I don't know. But what I will say is that his ability to apply leverage to get hostages out may clear the way then for what's even more important than the hostage issue, which is bringing this violence and this situation in Gaza and the insecurity for Israelis emanating from it to an end. Now, I'm not an optimist in the Middle East peace process. I think that optimism is, you have to have your head, examined if you're a total optimist about it. But again, this plan is not pie in the sky. The 20-point plan is about much more basic, realistic, getting basic governance in place with qualified Palestinians and international experts. It's about security provided by Arab states primarily and some international troops there to stabilize Gaza. But above all, it requires Hamas first and foremost to disarm.
Will we get to the end of this, assuming that this ends, and a great deal of credit will be owed to Jared Kushner? Did he end up playing a critical role here?
Well, I don't know again, but I think that the nuances of this plan suggest that somebody with the kind of prior experience that Jared had from the first term was probably involved.
Interesting.
And so my guess is that he probably helped shape it, and the fact that he's in Egypt helping Steve Witkoff with this is also a good sign. It demonstrates it redoubled presidential commitment to this. And, presidential involvement in Middle East peace has become the coin of the realm. Without it, it's very hard to get anywhere.
Not right. How often has it been due? How usual or unusual is that to have someone who's actually not a member of the administration step in and provide the insights or the salve that's needed at that moment?
Yeah, it's happened less on Middle East peace, but I think back on Jimmy Carter's retired president going to North Korea.
That's right.
I think of Richardson similarly going to North Korea.
Yep.
You can go all the way back to FDR, even the Wilson administration. A trusted aide and friend is respected by international partners if he also knows what he's doing.
Yeah, that's a fascinating component to all of this. We haven't talked about Iran. We haven't talked about Iran's proxies other than Hamas. When you consider Yemen, when you consider Hezbollah, will there be a fit of opposition, maybe violence, in the wake of a deal being struck? Because that would indicate that they're out of business, no?
I don't think the Iranians are in a position right now to mount the kind of opposition, violent opposition to peace process making that they did in the past. The Intifadas and so forth had a heavy hand of Iran. But They're lying low. They don't want to be whacked anymore. It doesn't mean they've given up. They assume we're going to lose interest at some point, walk away, and then they can rebuild their strength. I think you will find there are going to be elements in Gaza who do not want this. I'm not even sure Hamas is in full control of the bands of armed men who have emerged in the chaos there. And so it's going to be tough, and that's why a stabilization force is going to be required.
Absolutely. Bands of armed men. Whatever fills that vacuum could be actually making it an even more dangerous place, your point.
Yeah, which is one reason why the Israelis don't want a full pullout. That's why they've drawn this yellow line.
Boy, fascinating. If this meeting goes well today, do we meet again? What should be the next step?
Well, if this meeting's successful, then the hard work begins. I mean, we always think getting to agreement is the hard part. Actually, implementing often can be even more challenging.
Right.
So getting a ceasefire, making sure that there is a real hostage exchange, and that, above all, the disarmament of Hezbollah is for real and not pretend.